pilot to pilot protocol.
Engaging now.
Pilot to pilot connection.
Hollywood has a problem, and it's not a lack of ideas. It's a refusal to accept when an idea has run its course. Every year, studios pour hundreds of millions of dollars into franchises that stopped being exciting a decade ago, slapping new casts onto old formulas and greenlighting sequels that exist for no reason other than brand recognition. The audience groans, the critics pile on, the box office numbers slip further and further, and yet somehow, the next installment still gets announced. And here's the thing, there are only 15 movies that are guilty of this trend. Some of these franchises were once genuinely great. Some changed the entire sci-fi genre, but somewhere along the way, the magic dried up. These are the 15 sci-fi franchises that Hollywood simply refuses to let die. And honestly, maybe it's time somebody said it out loud. They should just end everything. Number 15, Mortal Engines, 2018.
I'm gonna live.
Peter Jackson spent nearly a decade trying to bring Mortal Engines to the screen. He first acquired the rights to Philip Reeves' novel back in 2009, but the project sat untouched for years. By the time production finally kicked off in 2016, the landscape had shifted completely. Jackson didn't direct. Instead, he handed the reins to Christian Rivers. Jackson, along with Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, wrote the screenplay and produced. The studio clearly expected another franchise launcher. Scholastic, who controlled the book rights, had originally envisioned at least 2 films covering the 4-novel series. Universal came aboard as distributor. The production budget landed around $110 million. Universal then launched a global marketing campaign reportedly north of $120 million. So before a single ticket was sold, the total investment was pushing past $230 million. The trailers were spectacular. Behind the scenes, the production design team spent months constructing the look of a London-turned Predator city, layering Victorian architecture over industrial machinery at enormous cost. Jackson and Rivers made the movie they pitched, and Universal was fully aware it was a risky concept from the onset. Jackson had publicly expressed excitement about adapting the sequels, saying the books only got better as the series progressed. That conversation ended the moment the numbers came in. The return was brutal. Mortal Engines opened and earned just $7.5 million. By the time the run was over, domestic earnings sat at barely $16 million. Universal lost approximately $175 million on the project. Number 14, Resident Evil, 2002. George A. Romero was originally hired to write and direct the first Resident Evil film. Think about that for a second. The godfather of the zombie genre was brought in to adapt one of the most iconic horror video games ever made, and his script was rejected. Constantine Film, the German production company that purchased the live-action rights back in 1997, went in a completely different direction. By 2000, Paul W.S. Anderson was announced as writer and director. He cast Mila Jovovich as Alice and built the entire 6-film saga around her. The first Resident Evil arrived in 2002 on a $33 million budget and earned over $102 million worldwide. Not a blockbuster, but profitable enough to justify a sequel, and then another, and then 4 more. Over the next 14 years, Anderson kept returning to write and produce every installment, directing 4 of the 6 films himself. Behind the scenes, Anderson made clever use of raw, industrial European spaces to build the claustrophobic underground laboratory at the heart of the story. Professional dancers were hired to portray the zombies, as they had better control of their body movements. Anderson also worked to replicate specific camera angles from the original game. The character of the Red Queen was added as a deliberate homage to Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. In fact, a brand new Resident Evil reboot for Sony is ongoing right now, set for release in September 2026, with a projected first weekend earning of $20 million. Number 13, Divergent, 2014.
You meant to?
Think he was gonna let you off without a scratch?
Lionsgate spent years building itself into the young adult franchise powerhouse. Twilight printed money. The Hunger Games turned the studio into a major player. So when Veronica Roth's Divergent series hit bookstores in 2011 and became a massive bestseller, the studio moved fast. And here's the thing. On paper, everything looked like a sure thing from every angle. And for a while it was, till it wasn't. Neil Burger was announced as director in August 2012. Shailene Woodley was cast as Triss Pryor. She was a serious actress taking a franchise role, and the tension between those two things would define everything that followed. Behind the scenes, the studio was clearly betting on the franchise, not the star. Production was primarily based in Chicago, with the Abnegation Village physically built on South Wells Street alongside the Chicago River. Interior sets including Triss's family home and the Dauntless Dining Hall were constructed on sound stages at Cinespace Film Studios. The facility was built on the site of a former steelworks that was still growing toward what was expected to become the largest soundstage complex in the United States outside of Hollywood. The train car used to transport the Dauntless faction around the city was built from scratch at Cinespace and designed to be mobile enough to travel to various Chicago locations. And here's the problem. Before the film opened, Lionsgate announced it would be downgraded to a TV movie on their Starz network, with plans for a spin-off series. That decision nearly killed the franchise. Woodley told reporters point blank that she hadn't signed up to do a television show. Teller said the switch caught them all by surprise. Without their leading lady, the project stalled completely. Divergent opened and returned $288.9 million at the box office. The opening weekend pulled $55 million domestically. Number 12. The Maze Runner, 2014. In 2011, the young adult market was exploding. Twilight had already proven that teen novels could become billion-dollar film properties. The Hunger Games was on its way to doing the same, and studios were scrambling to snatch up any YA intellectual property they could find. Fox purchased the film rights to James Dashner's The Maze Runner novels, and what happened next was one of the most impressive return on investment stories in modern blockbuster history. The first film was made for just $34 million. Director Wes Ball was making his feature debut. There were no A-list stars, no massive set pieces built from scratch, no franchise pedigree to fall back on. And yet the film grossed $348 million worldwide. Seeing these numbers, Fox immediately greenlit the sequel. The first sequel, The Scorch Trials, arrived exactly 1 year later on a still modest $61 million budget and pulled in $312 million globally. Then, everything went wrong. During production on the third sequel, which is titled The Death Cure, Dylan O'Brien was severely injured in a stunt gone wrong. He was pulled off the top of a moving vehicle and struck by another. He suffered a concussion, a facial fracture, and brain trauma. Production shut down entirely. O'Brien later said he had raised safety concerns before the accident, and they were not listened to. He spent months recovering and at one point was convinced he could never return to a film set again. By the time The Death Cure finally arrived, the cultural moment had passed. It still grossed $288 million worldwide. The trilogy made a combined $949 million. Number 11. Pacific Rim, 2013. Guillermo del Toro worked 17 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, for months to make Pacific Rim. He had never shot a film in fewer than 115 days, and the studio gave him 103. He ran a splinter unit before main shooting began each morning and directed on his days off. Every decision, from creature design to camera angles, went through him personally. He called it his most unmodest film, and on paper, it looked like the start of something massive. The original concept came from screenwriter Travis Beacham, who imagined the entire thing while walking near Santa Monica Pier. He saw a giant robot and a giant monster emerging from the fog, and the story wrote itself from there. Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures backed the production with a budget of roughly $190 million. The film was shot using Red Epic cameras, and Del Toro initially refused to convert it to 3D, arguing the sheer scale of the creatures and machines would make the effect look wrong. He eventually relented. Pacific Rim opened in 2013 and earned $411 million worldwide. Then came the first sequel. Pacific Rim Uprising arrived in 2018 without Del Toro in the director's chair, and the tone shifted dramatically. The weight, the atmosphere, the operatic sense of scale that had defined Del Toro's vision was replaced by something closer to a generic blockbuster. The film opened to $150 million globally and eventually grossed around $290 million worldwide. And here's the thing, Del Toro himself never watched the sequel. He compared the idea to watching home movies from an ex-wife. Number 10. Predator, 1987. The entire Predator franchise started as a punchline. After Rocky IV came out in 1985, a joke circulated through Hollywood that since Rocky Balboa had run out of earthly opponents, his next fight would have to be against an alien. Screenwriters Jim and John Thomas took that joke seriously and wrote a script called Hunter. Producer Joel Silver picked it up. John McTiernan was hired to direct, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was cast as the lead, on the condition that the story be rewritten. He didn't want it to be just him versus the alien. He wanted a full team of commandos, and that rewrite changed everything. The budget was roughly $15 million. Filming took place in the jungles of Mexico from March to June 1986. The creature effects were built by Stan Winston's studio, and the original Predator design was so bad that it had to be completely scrapped mid-production. Jean-Claude Van Damme had been cast to play the creature in a suit, but the early design looked cheap and unconvincing. Van Damme was replaced, Winston redesigned the alien from scratch, and Kevin Peter Hall stepped in at nearly 7 feet tall to bring the Predator to life. Predator opened on June 12, 1987, and grossed $98 million worldwide. It had the second biggest opening weekend of that year. Then came the sequels. The first one, Predator 2, came in 1990 and made barely half the original's domestic gross. 2 Alien vs. Predator crossover films followed in the 2000s. Both were profitable, but neither critically respected. Predators, the plural version, arrived in 2010 and earned $127 million. Number 9. Ghostbusters, 1984. Dan Aykroyd's original Ghostbusters script would have cost $200 million to produce. The concept was wild. Time-traveling ghost hunters battling supernatural threats across dimensions, written as a vehicle for Aykroyd and John Belushi. But here's the thing. Belushi died in 1982, and the project had to be completely reimagined. Harold Ramis was brought in to rewrite it. Ivan Reitman signed on to direct with one condition from Columbia Pictures. The film had to be ready within a single year. The budget was set between $25 and $30 million. Columbia had so little faith in the project that executives were openly preparing for failure. At one early screening, an industry member told Bill Murray's agent, "Don't worry, we all make mistakes." Then the film opened and earned over $282 million worldwide in its initial run. On paper, sequels for Ghostbusters should be printing money heavily. In reality, it was the opposite. The franchise went cold. For decades, Bill Murray famously resisted a third film. And then in 2016, Sony rebooted the franchise with an all-female cast, directed on a staggering $144 million budget. And the result was a total financial disaster. The film earned $229 million globally. Number 8. Men in Black, 1997.
Vehicle and put your hands on your head.
Will Smith earned $5 million for the original Men in Black. By the time the third film came around 15 years later, he was making $100 million for a single movie. That salary trajectory tells you everything about how Hollywood values a franchise star and why it eventually becomes impossible to sustain. The first Men in Black arrived in 1997 on a $90 million budget and grossed $589 million worldwide. Behind the scenes, the chemistry between Smith and Tommy Lee Jones was the engine. Jones had initially been disappointed with the script, reportedly telling people it stank, and only accepted the role after Steven Spielberg personally promised it would improve. Smith wasn't even the studio's first choice. Spielberg and Sony wanted Chris O'Donnell. During production, the visual design of the alien creatures went through an unexpected evolution. Director Sonnenfeld told makeup artist Rick Baker he wanted aliens that shouldn't look like how humans perceive them, initially pushing for creatures without eyes. After 3 months of Baker producing unconventional designs, Sonnenfeld admitted he kept arriving back at humanoid features, realizing the audience needed to know where the alien was looking. When the first Men in Black sequel arrived in 2002, Smith's deal had evolved dramatically. He earned $20 million up front plus 10% of the gross. Men in Black 2 made $441 million worldwide, netting Smith an estimated $64 million total. Number 7. The Matrix, 1999. Warner Brothers was going to make another Matrix film with or without the Wachowskis. That detail, which Lana Wachowski later confirmed publicly, is the most important thing to understand about why The Matrix Resurrections exists. The original 1999 film was made on a $63 million budget and grossed $467 million worldwide. It won 4 Academy Awards and introduced concepts like the red pill and bullet time into the global vocabulary. The sequels, Reloaded and Revolutions, were shot back-to-back on a combined budget of around $300 million and released months apart in 2003. Reloaded earned $742 million, becoming the highest-grossing R-rated film in history at the time. Revolutions made $427 million. Together, the trilogy generated over $1.6 billion in theatrical revenue and billions more in home video, licensing, and merchandise. The franchise had generated an estimated $3 billion in total revenue by 2006, and then it stopped. For nearly 2 decades, there were video games, animated shorts, and persistent rumors, but no new film, until Warner Brothers made it clear that a new Matrix was coming, regardless of whether its creators wanted to participate. Faced with the prospect of someone else reshaping her creation, Lana Wachowski agreed to return. She co-wrote the screenplay with David Mitchell and Alexander Heeman, and directed alone for the first time, without her sister Lily. Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss returned. The budget was $190 million. The 4th sequel, Resurrections, opened on December 22, 2021, and was simultaneously released on HBO Max as part of Warner Brothers' pandemic-era streaming strategy. Number 6. Alien, 1979. Before Ridley Scott, before Sigourney Weaver, before H.R. Giger transformed cinema with his biomechanical nightmares, the film that became Alien was a project that no major studio wanted to touch. And here's the thing, Scott had previously made only The Duelists. He had never helmed anything approaching this scale. Behind the scenes, O'Bannon introduced Scott to the artwork of H.R. Giger, and both felt his painting Necronom 4 was the representation they wanted for the film's antagonist. Fox initially believed Giger's work was too ghastly for audiences, but the production team persisted. Scott flew to Zurich to meet Giger and recruited him to work on all aspects of the alien and its environment, including the surface of the planetoid, the derelict spacecraft, and all 4 forms of the alien from the egg to the adult. Over 200 crew members built the 3 main sets at Shepperton Studios near London. The Nostromo's corridors were created using parts of a bomber aircraft, and mirrors were used to give the impression that the corridors were much longer than they actually were. The creature inside the suit was not special effects. The head was built by Carlo Rambaldi using Giger's designs and contained over 900 moving parts, with a human skull hidden beneath the translucent cover. The chest burst scene was deliberately kept from the cast. Ridley Scott showed them the puppet that would emerge, but not what it would do when it fired. He wanted genuine reactions, and he got them. When Alien opened, it earned over $100 million worldwide, launching a franchise that would span over 5 decades. Number 5. Star Trek, 1979. Gene Roddenberry pitched Star Trek as a feature film in 1969. Nobody wanted it. The show had struggled in the ratings throughout its 3-season run and was considered a commercial failure. It only survived as long as it did because of an unprecedented letter-writing campaign from fans. Then something unexpected happened. The show exploded in syndication. Reruns turned Star Trek into a cultural phenomenon that was bigger in death than it ever was in life. By the mid-1970s, Paramount took notice and began developing a sequel TV series called Star Trek Phase 2. That project was eventually scrapped and repurposed into Star Trek: The Motion Picture. The budget ballooned to $44 million, partly because millions had already been sunk into the abandoned television series. Seeing this, Paramount immediately slashed the budget for the sequel. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan was made for just $12 million and became one of the most beloved sci-fi films of all time. That model worked for years. Keep the budgets modest, keep the audience loyal, and the franchise survives. Until J.J. Abrams rebooted the franchise in 2009. His Star Trek cost $140 million and earned $387 million globally. Into Darkness followed in 2013 on a $190 million budget, grossing $467 million. Since then, the Star Trek franchise has been trapped in development purgatory. In fact, a fourth Abrams-era film was announced, reworked, shelved, revived, and ultimately canceled after the Paramount-Skydance merger in late 2025. Number 4. Planet of the Apes, 1968. The original Planet of the Apes cost $5.8 million to produce in 1968. The prosthetic makeup alone, designed by John Chambers, cost roughly $1 million. Chambers had previously worked designing prosthetics for wounded veterans returning from the Vietnam War, and he brought that medical precision to creating the film's ape faces. The cast was fantastic. Charlton Heston earned $250,000 for the lead role. The film grossed $33 million domestically, making it a massive hit for 20th Century Fox. Then something unexpected happened. 2 years later, 4 sequels followed between 1970 and 1973. Each with drastically shrinking budgets. Beneath the Planet of the Apes was made for $3 million. Escape from the Planet of the Apes cost $2.5 million. Conquest and Battle each came in around $1.7 million. The franchise was literally being bled dry, each installment cheaper and less culturally relevant than the last. A television series then followed in 1974 and was canceled after 14 episodes. The property went dormant for decades. Decades later, Rise of the Planet of the Apes arrived in 2011 with a completely fresh approach. The film was built on groundbreaking motion capture technology from Weta Digital. It grossed $482 million worldwide. Number 3. Jurassic Park, 1993. Steven Spielberg paid Michael Crichton $2 million for the film rights to Jurassic Park before the novel was even published. Universal had been in a bidding war with Warner Brothers, Sony, and Fox, and Spielberg won partly because he had already been in discussions with Crichton about an unrelated medical drama that eventually became the television series ER. The deal was struck in 1990. The film was made for roughly $63 million. It earned $914 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing film of all time until Titanic surpassed it 4 years later. Behind the scenes, the visual effects, created by Industrial Light and Magic, fundamentally changed filmmaking. Computer-generated dinosaurs replaced stop-motion animation overnight. An entire industry shifted because of one movie. Then, The Lost World followed in 1997. Then, Jurassic Park 3 arrived in 2001 and grossed $368 million worldwide. Despite these numbers, the reviews got worse with each installment. The franchise went quiet for 14 years. Then, Jurassic World happened and earned $1.67 billion worldwide. It became the third highest-grossing film of all time at that point. Number 2. Terminator, 1984. James Cameron sold the rights to the Terminator for $1. That is not metaphor, and it is not an exaggeration. Cameron sold the rights to the project to producer Gail Ann Hurd for a token fee, on the condition that she would only produce the film if he were to direct it. He was 29 years old. He had no leverage and no track record. What he had was a script and an absolute certainty that he could make the film work if anyone would let him. The film was released in October 1984 and grossed $78 million worldwide, turning Cameron into a major filmmaker overnight. 7 years later, he returned with one of the most expensive films ever produced at the time. Terminator 2: Judgment Day had a budget of $102 million. The film pioneered liquid metal CGI effects through Industrial Light and Magic that had never been attempted at that scale. It grossed $520 million worldwide and became the highest-grossing film of 1991. And here's the interesting part. Terminator 2 ended perfectly. Sarah Connor drove into an uncertain but hopeful future. The story was done. And then it wasn't. Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines arrived 12 years later in 2003 without Cameron directing. Schwarzenegger returned for a reported $30 million salary plus 20% of the profits, making it one of the most expensive actor deals in history at the time. The budget hit $187 million. The film grossed $433 million. Number 1. Star Wars, 1977. George Lucas was offered $500,000 to direct Star Wars. He turned down a raise in his directing fee and instead negotiated for something the studio considered worthless: the merchandising rights and the rights to any sequels. 20th Century Fox agreed because nobody believed the film would succeed. The budget was $11 million. Filming in Tunisia was plagued by the worst rainstorm the region had seen in decades. Alan Ladd Jr., the Fox executive who championed the project, was one of the few people who believed it would work. Behind the scenes, Lucas had to create industrial light and magic from scratch because he discovered that Fox's visual effects department had been shut down. In the first 3 weeks, they had already spent more than $87,000 and had completed just one of the 360 visual effects shots the film required. The crew who built the future of cinema from a warehouse in Van Nuys were essentially inventing new camera technology as they went, because the technology they needed did not yet exist. Star Wars grossed $775 million worldwide in its original and re-release runs. The franchise that followed is now a Disney property valued in the tens of billions. If you made it this far, drop a comment and tell us which franchise on this list you think should have stopped after the first film. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Vintacine Vault, because there is plenty more where this came from.